Welcome to season 2 of Inside America's Minds, episode 1. And today I have with me Noble Gibbens. Noble, I'm hugging you from afar because how long have we been trying to do this gig together?
Probably 6 months, it seems like.
Oh, it's been longer than that. It was like during the pandemic. I mean, it was longer, and with your schedule, my schedule. So thank you so much. And you're a fellow Coloradan. You're in Colorado Springs. I'm here outside of Boulder, and today we have the sun. So it's a great day to start with. So
Yes.
you have, and like I told you before we started the show, I was so intrigued by you because you're almost like, you have like these two different images. And one of the things that really attracted me, and I said, I've got to see if Noble will be on the show, is the fact that you specialize in emotion. And that is my baby. That is my passion. When it comes to human behavior and emotion, everything about it fascinates me. So you also have an emotional intelligence podcast, which we're going to get to. A little bit about you, and then I'm going to have you add on, is you are a United States West Point graduate and an Army veteran. You're a homeschool. I don't know what's wrong with me today, except I'm so excited to have you on the show. You're on a homeschool. You are a homeschool dad, and you are the owner of EQGangster.com.
You got it, Jody.
Right?
You got it.
Okay. Yeah, a little tongue twisting there. So when I look at you, I'm like, yeah, right. If I saw you walking down the street, I would not peg you. And I'm pretty good at, profiling people and making assumptions. I would not peg you as especially, a West Point cadet graduate. A vet, yeah, because there's something about vets that is just you can feel it. But for those of you on Spotify, you got to watch the YouTube. Here you are, and we're going to talk about that. But tell me a little bit about you as a West Point graduate, an Army vet. What was your rank, military rank?
So I got out as a captain, as an 03 in the Army.
Okay. All right. So what attracted you to West Point?
So it was junior year, high school year, junior year. My mom, we came down in my bedroom and said, "Hey, son, it's junior year. What are you thinking about college?" And for me, I love Jesus. And so I said, well, I could apply to some Christian schools, but there I would get challenged spiritually and maybe academically, but not any other way. I said, I want to get my college experience. I want to be challenged in every single area possible, physically, mentally, spiritually, academically, emotionally, every area I can get challenged. I want the hardest experience I can possibly get. And I said, I could also apply to an Ivy League school and be challenged academically and, intellectually and mentally, but probably not all the other areas. And so she said, okay, well, just start applying to some of the colleges and stuff. And so within the week, I met one of my high school buddies who was a year older than me. So he graduated before. He had this short haircut. And I said, dude, what's up with the short hair? Do you like, where have you been? He said, well, I just quit I just finished up my freshman year at West Point because I got accepted to flight school and I wanted to become a pilot. So that's why I'm leaving West Point. I said, well, what's West Point? He said, well, it's really intense. They yell and scream at you. You do a lot of push-ups and the academics are really hard. I'm like, that's where I want to go to school.
Right into the fire, huh? Was it everything you thought it would be?
So I actually applied to the Naval Academy and to West Point. I got accepted to Naval Academy first. And so I said, hey, I'm coming to the Naval Academy. But a month later, I got my acceptance to West Point. I'm like, oh, man, what should I do? I prayed about it. I did some pros and cons and ended up accepting the West Point nomination. And so it was much harder than I ever thought. So I had I'm not, academics does not come necessarily naturally to me. I have to study and study and study. So like in high school, after all my athletic stuff, I would study probably 4 hours a night for high school. And so I learned, some really hardcore study habits and stuff. And at West Point, I had to study we averaged, 22 to 23 credit hours per semester on top of all of our military stuff and physical training and all the different different things we have to do on the side. And so I had to study my butt off just to, I tell people, they say, well, how'd you do at West Point? I said, oh, I graduated at the top, bottom third of my class. So,
but you did it. You did it. What is your fondest memory of West Point?
great question. Wow. Fondest memory. So many, so many memories. I would say just the classmates that I've had the opportunity to meet and interact.
Hmm.
I am humbled on a daily basis at the quality and caliber of my classmates. It's humbling to just
Oh,
know some of these folks. So I would say the people are what I remember the most.
wow. So let's talk about your brand with the Emotional Intelligence Podcast. And obviously, your experience at the as a cadet, let me say that, somehow contributed. But you said your website, it says, I teach leaders how to get their emotions working for them rather than against them. Stop letting your emotions control you and start using them to make you a more empathetic, effective decision maker.
That's right.
Why emotion, and why emotion and emotional intelligence?
So my mom's a 4'10" little Hispanic lady, and my dad was a big giant white guy, and he was 6'3", 285. He was an emergency room physician. He was an
Was
ER
he
doc.
really?
Yeah,
Oh my
yeah.
God.
So he was a big teddy bear, and my mom again. So she raised me speaking Spanish, and so in our house we would yell at each other for conflict, and so. As long as I can remember, as early and I'm only bringing this up because this is the topic about emotions and stuff. I love my parents. My dad died about 13 years ago, but I have
Okay.
great parents. My mom's still around. She's amazing, so I love her so much. But this is just an area that we never got taught. So we yell and scream at each other. We'd go off, stomp off in our respective corners of the house, come back an hour later, and act like nothing happened. So there's zero conflict resolution. There was zero validating or affirming our emotions or how we were feeling, or anything like that. So I learned how to stuff, avoid, stew, and brood my entire childhood.
Say that again. Stop, avoid, stew, and brew.
Yeah, stuff, avoid,
Oh,
stew,
stuff.
and brood. Yeah, I
Okay.
learned. I've got PhDs in that. I did that for most of my life, and so I went. Then I went. So I learned that in my childhood how to stuff, avoid, stew, and brood. And then I go off to West Point. We're not teaching emotional awareness or emotional intelligence at West Point.
Yeah.
At the time they weren't. Then I went into the Army. Learned how to jump out of airplanes with the Airborne School, Ranger School. Was in
Oh,
the
wow.
82nd Airborne Division and as an infantry officer. And then I got into business. And so in business, they weren't teaching, I wasn't learning anything about emotions and stuff there. And so that's how I ended up, 4 or 5 years ago, fully in the third quarter of my life, not having a clue about emotional intelligence. So I yelled at my wife 3 times in 3 weeks, and she said 3 things. Number one, don't ever do that again. Number two, you've never done that before, which means number three, you got more issues than Time Magazine. And
Oh my
so
God. Kathy. Kathy is your wife's
that's
name.
right.
She
That's
sounds
right.
phenomenal.
Oh,
Shout out to
amazing.
Kathy. All right.
That's right. That's
So,
right.
yeah,
So
because,
went to counseling, and the counselor introduced
okay.
me to two revolutionary new concepts, Jody.
Okay.
Revolutionary, called feelings and emotions. And
Mm,
I was like, what are you talking about? Did you just cuss me out? Like, what is this? What is this? Voodoo? Like, what is feelings and emotions? And so he got me on this emotional growth journey. And so I really took ownership. I was really upset that I didn't know anything about this area. And I love people, I love leadership, and I had no concept. I was completely emotionally clueless. I was a people pleaser addict. I was emotionally codependent. I was a toxic positivity,
mm.
self condemnation, self hatred, imposter syndrome, food addict, etc., etc., etc. And after 2 years of having a very intentional emotional fitness program, I told my wife, I'm like, babe, we got to start a podcast, and I got to share all the junk in my trunk and all the lessons I've learned, because I can't be the only emotionally clueless guy out there. There's got to be other nobles out there that have no concept of their emotions and feelings. And so we started the podcast. It started out as EQ for Entrepreneurs. And then a lot of the people that that we started to help and work with were not entrepreneurs. So I called up one of my buddies named Alika Freitas. He's got a company called Fanfare. He's a branding expert. And I said, Alika, you followed my journey. Like most of the folks that I'm serving are not necessarily entrepreneurs. Help me with my branding? And he said, Noble, how many big, bald, bearded, tattooed former Army Rangers are teaching emotional intelligence? I said, probably not too many. And he said, Noble, you're the gangster of EQ, man. You got to be the EQ gangster. So that's how it came to be.
Wow. And how big are you? Are you big like your dad?
Not quite, but I'm close. I'm 6'1" and probably 250.
Oh my God. And like I was saying, if I saw you walking down the street, I don't see a cadet, I see a vet, but I could also see a gangbanger, to be quite honest. Right. You have multiple body ink tats. I am intrigued by tattoos. So, and those of you again on Spotify, you got to watch the YouTube to see this. If you are like most of us, your tattoos have significance and meaning.
Absolutely.
And tell us a little bit about that.
So I'll do this one. So for those of y'all that are listening on the podcast and not watching on the YouTube channel, so I've got a present, a gift on my left hand, and it's on fire. It's engulfed in flames. And I have 2T1, 6, and 7 on my knuckles. And so here's where that comes from. So again, I love Jesus. There's a verse, a chapter called, it's Matthew 25, 14 to 30. It's the parable of the entrepreneur. The entrepreneur goes on a vacation. He's got three employees. He gives $5 grand, 5 talents to his first employee. He gives $2 grand, 2 talents to his second employee, and he gives $1 grand to his third employee. And he told him, he said, look, I'm going to go on a vacation, family vacation to Colorado, to the Rocky Mountains. And he said, I want you to invest my money. Give me a return on my money. And so they're like, okay, absolutely. The first 2 guys double his money. The third guy, because he was afraid, because of his fear, he buried his grand, the 1 talent, literally in his backyard. So when the boss came back, the entrepreneur came back and said, how'd we do with the investments? First 2 guys said, hey, we doubled your money. He said, okay, great. Here's more responsibility because you've been faithful with a few things. I'm going to give you more responsibility, more stewardship. The third guy said, hey, boss, sorry, man, I was afraid. I had teeny heart syndrome. I was scared. And so
heart syndrome. All right.
So I buried all the grand that you gave me. I buried it in the backyard. So then fast forward to my tattoo. Well, here's the deal. I feel like God has given me I feel like I'm the 5 talent guy. That God's given me $5 grand, 5 talents. But I have behaved for 95% of my life like the 1 talent guy, because of my people-pleasing addiction, because of my emotional codependence, because of my emotional neediness. I have hidden the 5 talents that God's given me in the backyard because of my fear and all my emotional dysfunction, until I started this emotional growth journey. And he said, Noble, I gave you your gifts so that you could share and make the world a better place, not so you could hold on to them. So 2 Timothy 1, 6, and 7 says, fan into flames the gifts that God has given you. Verse 7, for we have not been given a spirit of timidity or fear, but of power, of love, and a sound mind.
Wow.
So this is my reminder to be confident and bold with the gifts that I've got, and to sharpen and hone and refine them and share them with the world, not hide them in the backyard.
And we are privileged that you do that. And it's on your website with the picture of you. You can see that tattoo on your hand. And I had made some comments that picture of you is very eclectic, just like you are, because there's so many dimensions to you, and the backdrop and your socks, just the whole picture is very revealing in a way of your complexity, your diversity, but the wonder of you. So I want to step back a little bit in time. Talk to us about young Noble. Is Noble your birth name?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Interesting. How did your mom take to that? Was that Dad's idea, or was it your mom's idea?
So it's actually my dad's name. So I'm actually
Oh,
named after my
okay.
dad. So
Okay.
his name is Everett Noble Gibbons, and he went by
Okay.
Everett. My name is Everett Noble Gibbons, but I've always gone by
Gone by
Noble.
Noble. And it suits you well. What was
Thank
it
you.
like growing up as you? And where did you grow up?
That's a great question.
I
What
had
was
to
it?
ask it. I had to ask it. You knew I was going to ask it, right?
Oh, that's right,
Words out,
Jody.
watch DeLuca. uh,
What was it like growing up as me? So, 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 I've always loved people. So I'm sure you're familiar with a book called Strengths Finder 2.0. It's a great book. It's a Gallup poll book, Clifton Strengths Finder, and you take this assessment and it spits out your top strengths. And literally my number one strength is called Woo, which stands for winning others over. So
okay, I'm
all of
not
my
familiar with the book, so I'll have to
okay,
look it up. But go
it's
ahead.
an
So,
excellent
winning others over.
winning others over. So, and my other strengths are positivity, empathy, developer, and futuristic. So, I'm all of my strengths are very people oriented strengths. And
Okay.
so, ever since I was a little kid, I've always been the extrovert, gregarious, outgoing. But the thing is, because I was emotionally unhealthy, I was seeking my validation and approval and affirmation in everybody else rather than in for me, my faith and my relationship with the Lord and in myself. I try to get validation and approval from everyone else around me. So
Okay, I want to stop you there though. So when in the history of your life, Noble, was the first time you realized that as a young person that this is what you needed, this is what you wanted? Was there any like cataclysmic moment growing up that you saw yourself as needing the affirmation or acceptance from others?
no, I've been emotionally clueless my entire life until literally 4 years ago. So I
What?
was never aware of my neediness at the time.
How? Okay, all right. The first recollection that you were.
4 years ago.
Really?
Yeah,
Okay. All right.
absolutely.
So let's, because I'm going to hit you on that again, but let's
Yeah,
go
please.
back to growing up. So, did you have friends?
Truckloads of friends.
Okay. What was the hardest thing about being you as a kid?
Man, Jody, great question. What? The hardest thing.
Yeah.
Okay, so great. So excellent question. So because of my emotional unhealthiness and my emotional neediness, for me, rejection was my kryptonite. If
Okay.
I felt the emotion rejection, it crushed my soul. It was soul crushing because again, I was not emotionally healthy.
Okay. So now I'm going to bring you back in time. Do you remember an event growing up, the first time you were crushed like that with that
Ooh.
emotional rejection?
Jody,
We've all been
oh
through
man.
it, but I want to hear it from you. Do you remember? Is there that snapshot in time in your brain like it is for all of us?
I think man, that's great, Jody. I'm a question guy. I love questions and you are giving me some
Just answer the question. No, I got to
but
bring you back, dude.
but I'm
Okay.
enjoying
Okay.
the question. So I would say probably okay. Well that was more of an embarrassing moment. It wasn't necessarily rejection. Playing basketball. So I love playing basketball. I played basketball a lot, but again, because of my people pleasing addiction, I was hypersensitive and hyper aware of, oh man, what if I miss the shot? What if I miss a shot? I could lose the game for
Mm.
the team, and now now I'm a failure and a loser so it was probably just a fear, the intense fear of missing a shot playing basketball, and that was the ultimate rejection if I missed a shot and lost the game for the team, so that would probably for sure one.
So, would you say you were a young person who had low self esteem or high self esteem?
I was so I was a great mask wearer
Okay.
who had a low, definitely some big insecurities, but I don't know that other folks would notice it because I was so extroverted and gregarious, but definitely a low grade insecurity for sure
Okay.
as a
Now,
kid.
you say this unhealthy emotional addiction. Why the term addiction, which has such a negative connotation?
Well, so when and again, I didn't realize all this stuff until a handful of years ago. I have been a people pleaser addict for almost 4 decades, and uh, why was it an addiction? Because I would literally make every single decision. 99% of my decision making was to subconsciously, now none of this was
Hmm.
conscious, subconsciously, to gain the approval of everyone around me. And that's just not the way to live my life, live anyone's life, right? To try to get approval from everyone else around me. And I had no idea until, again, 4 or 5 years ago, how every single decision was in some form or fashion trying to get the approval and validation of somebody else.
Did you have anxiety, panic, or depression?
So anxiety, yes.
Hmm.
Panic, no. Depression as a kid, no. But I went through a hardcore when I was, let's see, in 2005. I was probably like in the 30s somewhere. I was 30. I was exactly 30, maybe 31. And I was hardcore suicidal for 2 years.
God bless you. Wow.
And then for another decade, depression. It wasn't as intense as the 2 years of suicidal, but for sure depression for another decade after the 2 years of suicidal
What
tendencies.
kind of suicidal thoughts did you have, Noble?
Oh, if my eyes were open, I was fantasizing and obsessing about figuring out how, oh, I could do it this way, I could do it that way. Oh
Okay.
man, I could do it this way. So I had, man, that's what
So,
that was. Yeah.
no, no, you go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, it just that became
Mhm.
my comfort. It was my friend. It was my, it's just, and you know this way better than me, but when you get in that state of mind, you're not thinking clearly, right? And I was not in a clear state of mind for those 2 years.
But you were feeling. And that feeling is so strong, the emotions, which really navigate a majority of our life. And it's like with your emotional intelligence, feeling versus fact. And I stopping and identifying those feelings. And are they rational feelings? But the
Right.
subjectivity of emotion, again, sets us apart from every other living organism, but it's our biggest asset, but also what makes us so vulnerable. And like
Right.
I've always said, being human means experiencing the past in the present as if it's happening today, and even worrying, anticipating what might happen in the future. We can still feel that today,
That's
just
right.
that thought, viscerally.
That's right.
Okay, so you mentioned that you are a military veteran. You were airborne, captain. Any combat, any time overseas?
No, so yes, time overseas, no combat. So I came in the army after a conflict, and I got out of the army before a conflict. So I was one
Okay,
of those weird timelines where I missed the combat opportunity.
okay. And thank you for your service. Always
Sure.
thank you. So you talk about this deep dive, if you will. And I call it that dark emotional abyss because when
Mm.
people describe it to me, and I painted it too, their experiences, and it's always very heavy with a lot of darkness. What were the triggers, or did you know? Was there a family history? Were there triggers? Is it all of the above?
So I was molested when I was 5, and I was molested again when I was in college.
How did that
And
happen?
let's see. So which one?
Whichever one you want to start with.
Yeah. So when I was 5, I was hanging out with a family friend who was, he was a family friend, kind of like an uncle, and he said, "Hey, Noble, let's go for a ride in the truck." And I said, "I'm 5, okay, I don't know what's
Mm.
going on." So we go for a ride in the truck, and then he stops in the middle of this cornfield, and kind of the rest was history. And of course, and I just remember like
Yeah.
this just does not, this is not, I couldn't, I just trying to process it in my 5-year-old little brain.
Yeah.
Just the math was not adding up, right? It just was not, it was very confusing and yeah, it was just, it was pretty intense. So that was when I was 5. And so, but what was odd is I repressed it, right? Like, in fact, I had gone to, even in college, had repressed that too. Went to counseling probably 15 years later, and the counselor's like, "Hey, have you ever had any trauma?" I'm like, "No, I haven't had any trauma. Like, I'm fine. I got no issues." And they're like, "Well, no, 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 just like just sit a little bit and hang out and just kind of do
Mhm.
some reflection and stuff." And I said, "Look, I will, but I'm just telling you, I haven't had anything traumatic happen to me." And they're like, "Okay, just hang out, just 5 minutes of silence, just think about it, pray about it." So thought about it, and I asked God, I'm like, "Okay, God, this counselor thinks that I've had some sort of trauma. If I've had trauma, like, bring it up." And man, I got slammed with those two instances, and intense, like,
This was the first conscious recollection after the incidences, which I have to tell you is so common with people who have been sexually violated as
mm,
children. And
mm,
I want to thank you for sharing this with us. It is so much more common than people know it is,
wow.
and with women as well as men. So the second episode, Noble.
Yeah, and actually I had a discovery of these two things actually prior to that, and I'll share that here in a second. So
Mhm.
when I was at West Point, at the Army, we have the big rival for West Point is the Army Navy game. That's like the big
Right.
giant.
Yeah.
That's like the
Mhm.
only game that matters.
Mhm.
And so my man, I want to think. I don't know if I remember if it was my sophomore year or junior year, but a whole bunch of cadets will pile in one hotel room, and there'll be 4 dudes on the bed. There'll be 2 guys in the tub. There'll be 10 guys on the floor laying on, across each other, those kind of
Mhm.
stuff. It's just trying to, pile in as many dudes as possible to cut down on the cost and stuff. And so there's, I don't know, 3 or 4 of us in the bed, and I'm on the far side, and all of a sudden, like, and when I sleep, I'm like, I'm out. I'm super deep sleeper, and I wake up, I feel something moving, and
Mhm.
right downstairs, and I'm like I must be dreaming, because I know there's nobody who is messing with me. And I, very, very slowly kind of open my eyes, and sure enough, and so I kind of pretend like I'm kind of coming awake, and this guy, removes his hand and stuff, and I
Mhm.
I just remember that in that moment, like, I am gonna kill this guy. I'm gonna turn around, and I am gonna rip this guy's esophagus out of his throat. And it, it was super intense experience.
Wow.
And
Ah,
and then I thought, I had this thought, I'm like, well, crap, but if I kill him, which is what my plan is, if I kill him, I'll get kicked out of West Point, and I will go to jail for life. And I sure as heck don't want to go to jail. Um, so
mhm.
I'm gonna try to do my best to stay calm right now, because
My
I
God.
if I get, I am literally about to kill this guy. And so I don't know, somehow I repressed it. I shut it down, um, because again, I knew that I had no emotional control. So if I opened up that rage for a millisecond, I know I would not stop myself. I would have beat this guy to death. And so then what happened was,
Mm.
so repressed it, didn't do anything didn't beat this guy up or anything, or kill this guy. And then, so then I'm in the military. So it's like 5 years later, I'm a lieutenant, maybe even a captain. I'm talking to one of my buddies, and I just said, man, that somehow we got on LGBTQ, you know, and I'm like, oh yeah, man, I hate those guys. I want to be, if I ever see one, I'll beat one to, I'll kill these guys. And my buddy's like, dude, like, that's strong.
Hmm.
And I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, don't you hate these guys too? Don't you want to kill these guys? And he's like, well, I'm straight and I don't agree with that lifestyle, but I don't want to kill him. He's like, dude, like what's going on with that? I'm like, oh man, you're just being soft. But
Hmm.
in that moment, I thought, wow, okay, maybe, wow, I guess that is kind of strong. But I didn't understand why it was so strong until the counseling session when those two experiences came back up. I'm like, oh, that's why I wanted to kill those guys, right?
Okay.
Because of my two experiences.
Yeah.
And so, but again, but I was not aware of that in the moment, until that counseling session. And then when I was able to
Hmm.
start unpacking that.
And, I mean, fascinating, fascinating. And obviously, those emotional experiences, physical experiences were stored. Trauma is stored long term, hippocampus, and definitely part of who you are today and where you are today. Now, when you had again that dark dive into that world of depression, was this before or after those repressed memories were brought to consciousness?
That's a great question. So before,
Before.
yeah.
Okay. Did you work through them in counseling?
So after the 2 years of suicidal ideations and tendencies and stuff, and then I think it was like about 5 or 6 years into the depression is when I went to counseling, um, and started to work through some of
Okay.
those issues.
So, what stopped you from committing suicide? I'm just going to put it out there.
No, yeah, it's a great question. So a couple things. So uh I had, super strong faith, and I had spent a lot of time memorizing a lot of the Bible. And
Okay.
so I knew a lot of Bible verses, and at the time we didn't have any children. And uh so part of it was, man, because I've always wanted to have kids, and I thought, well, man, if I kill myself, I won't have an opportunity to have kids.
Okay.
But the world would be better if I don't have kids because they'd have my DNA and that kind of thing. So it was kind of a
Hmm.
back and forth with that thought. But then another one was, um, I had learned enough of God's word that I remembered a lot of the Bible verses, like, dude, this is just not, from a biblical perspective, it's not the way to go. This is not, quoting a lot of the Bible verses. But the funny thing is, about when you're in that state of mind, I could also come up with a number of verses that, well, for example, our sin separates us from God, there's a Bible verse in there. And so I would rest on that one rather
Okay.
than on all the other verses that, God forgives us of our sins. If we confess our sins, he is faithful and just and will forgive us of all unrighteousness. All the
Hmm.
Bible verses and stuff. So honestly, this is two of my tattoos. So one of the things that kept me alive was truth. God's truth
Okay.
is one thing that kept me alive. And the other one is, this took me a long, long time to embrace and own, but also grace, God's grace.
Hmm.
Grace was for everybody else, but it wasn't for me. I didn't feel
Hmm.
like, I'm like, God, you don't understand how bad I am and how evil I am. And your grace is good for everybody but me. And then somebody said, dude, do you really think that your issues are bigger and worse than the next guy's? Like, that God can't handle the junk in your trunk? Like, bro. um so anyway, and then I had, some friends that kind of tried to reach out and kind of do some intervention stuff, but I was pretty emotionally hijacked in that state for a
Hmm.
couple years. And when you're
Okay.
emotionally hijacked, again, there's not
Yeah.
a whole lot of logic that goes on.
Well, how did Catherine
Kathy, yep.
Kathy get you through this? I mean, that's hard for somebody who loves somebody who's depressed. I mean, and everybody around them.
that's a whole nother ball game. You're right.
Okay.
So I never told Kathy or anybody in my circle. I've always just played the game. I always put on my mask,
Mm,
put on my
played the
facade.
game.
So
Okay.
she knew that I was sucking, but she didn't know how bad I was sucking, because what happened was we had become financially independent. For me, became financially independent at 30 years old. So I didn't,
Okay.
I quit my job. I didn't need a job anymore because we were making some passive income. And so again went in this super suicidal phase, and I just would stay on the couch all day, so my wife's
Mhm.
like, she could tell something was obviously off and wrong, but fortunately, I guess, because we've kind of war gamed this a lot, but she didn't nag me. She didn't say, dude, suck it up, or she gave me a lot of grace and space to just
Mm,
go through go through that journey. But for her, it was brutal,
I'm
seeing
sure.
right,
Yeah.
seeing her husband being like a vegetable, a living vegetable, that was just being on the couch all day doing nothing for 2 years. It was very, very hard for her emotionally, very hard.
She sounds amazing. You sound like a great team.
She
I
is amazing.
I have a strange question for you. So when you were going through this deep depression, what part of your body hurt physically?
Uh, uh, I, I was not, again, I was not aware of, again, my self-awareness was not, all I knew. I was very aware of my thoughts,
Okay.
but had zero awareness of my emotions and my body.
Okay. So there was kind of like a disconnect.
100, absolutely,
Okay.
100%.
The reason I ask is so many people with depression and even anxiety have a lot of body pain as well. But the depths that you were at, you described what most people would,
Hmm.
all internalized, all in your head. And then when is your podcast, your EQGangster.com website and podcast, when is that created?
So that was probably another 15 years after the suicide and depression
Okay.
stuff.
How
Yeah.
long did it take you from the time that you were depressed to getting help? How long did it take you to come out of that, to start to feel light, but also see some light again, Noble?
Yeah, so for some reason, I went into the I call it the hell phase, the suicide tunnel, in
Suicide tunnel. Oh, wow. Wow.
in
Okay.
January of '05. And then for some crazy reason, I've reflected on it. I've shared this on podcasts.
Mm,
January of 2007 is when the clouds broke, and I saw,
mm.
so to speak, I saw some light. But it wasn't, literally, I woke up one day and it's like, wow, what's going on here? And it
No
was
medications?
no, 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 no medications
Oh
or
my God.
anything.
And so is there a family history of depression?
Yes.
Okay.
But
Family history of suicide?
yes, but I didn't know
Okay.
this, right? I
Okay.
wasn't aware of any
Mm,
of that stuff at the time.
mm,
But yeah, a number of folks on my, let's see, I think I was on my mom's
mm.
side, that, a lot of kind of issues and stuff sprinkled throughout different generations and stuff on my mom's
Wow,
side.
because we know there's a generational factor with that.
Yeah.
I have to thank you because you're giving all of us, myself, the listeners, just such an incredible gift by sharing this, because this is the experience of so many. And you are like the epitome of a man's man. You are
Mm,
man,
mm,
and especially in our American culture. Um, I see that changing though, but men are, historically, culturally, not supposed to talk about emotions, demonstrate emotions, and internalize a lot. The past 2 years, I have to say, I'm probably seeing more men in my private practice than women.
mm.
And that is a big turnaround. But it's people and stories coming from individuals like you that make that happen. So I want to thank you for that.
Absolutely, Jody. Thank you.
On your website, emotional intelligence is the ability to identify, process, and manage your emotions and the emotions of others to make more effective decisions in every area of your life. And then you have these questions, which I think are great questions to the public. Do you have trouble handling emotions? Do you find yourself stuffing and avoiding them, or do you explode when they become too intense, which a lot of men do? Do you have trouble reading other people's emotions? Are you sick of being emotionally constipated? Do you wish you could be more productive but aren't sure what's holding you back? Is stress and anxiety eating you up from the inside? Do you find yourself in conflict that surprises or stresses you out? And would you like to have deeper, richer relationships with the people you love? Wow. Now, I have a question. Is your website, is your brand specific to men, or do you have women that are very interested in emotional intelligence as well?
I've got a great mix of both men and women. In fact,
Nice. Okay.
right now we're doing a free challenge, a 5-day challenge called Tame Your Triggers
Mm,
Challenge. So specifically helping people unpack and grow through and grow from and heal through their triggers. My emotional triggers, I used to go from 0 to Incredible Hulk in 0.3 seconds.
wow.
And
Wow.
now after 4 or 5 years of my emotional fitness program, now I get triggered 95% less, and when I do get triggered, it only goes to a 2 or a 3. It doesn't go all the way to a 10. So in this 5-day free challenge, I'm sharing my process for how
Mm.
how it's helped me out.
So it's a 5-day free challenge. Can you give us a hint at what helps most people stop once that anger and fight and flight is in starting to take off?
I'll answer that a couple different ways. One is, yes, there are some tricks, but for me, those are shorter term solutions.
Okay.
The long term solution is to get emotionally healthy.
Okay.
The healthier you get emotionally, you don't need the tricks. Now you're just healthier emotionally. Now, that being said, the shorter term tools that can help, a couple different things. One is you feel yourself triggered and you're in rage mode, Hulk mode. If you are able to catch yourself at any point in that process and count to 5, it does a couple things. One, it puts some space between thought and behavior and action, and it also engages the logic side of your brain because it's counting, right? And the logic side, the mathematical side of your brain is the logic side. When you engage the mathematical side of your brain, the logic side of your brain, that helps to kind of diffuse those emotions a little bit to where you can start to catch yourself a little bit like, oh, whoo, man, I almost lost it there. So, and maybe it's you count to 5, maybe it's you count to 10. Another one is maybe you have a question. This is something else that my wife has been tremendous with me as I was still on the would air more towards the Hulk mode before I got emotionally healthy. She would just say, "Hey, Noble, I noticed that maybe you're feeling some kind of way. What are you feeling?"
Mhm, mhm,
Just asking me some logical questions that forced me to again to get out of my emotional soup, my
mhm.
emotional adrenaline. I call it an adrenaline tube, and get over to my logical side of my brain and engage and like, okay, man, what am I feeling? And because I had a low self-awareness, I really had to think about it. It took me a long time, and just that time it took for me to be able to answer her question helped me to kind of dissipate some of those emotions. Again, those are shorter term tools which are helpful. Long term solution is to work on your emotional fitness so that you get healthier, just overall emotionally.
And I thank you for that because I pretty much specialize in cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT. And one of the things that I use a lot of us with CBT use is feeling versus fact. And exactly what you said, disconnecting that feeling brain, that
Mm,
hijacked amygdala that you were talking about, where that adrenaline and the cortisol, the stress hormone, are dumped by the brain when we're upset or feeling something intense by a distracting event like counting or a
mm,
question. With the frontal lobes, the intellectual part will actually disconnect the feeling part of the brain. You are right on with that.
Wow. Well,
Okay.
thank you. I appreciate that
No, I mean,
feedback.
that's great because of the, we'll probably have to do this again at some point. I'm just really fascinated with what you're doing. All right. The 4 deadly sins of emotion. The 4 deadly sins of emotion. I'm grabbing onto this. What are they?
So I mentioned it earlier on, what I learned from my childhood: stuffing, avoiding, stewing,
Okay.
and brooding.
All right. So, and that applies to men as well as women.
100%.
It's
Absolutely.
it applies to anybody who feels anything. Now, all right. Where were you raised, by the way?
I was born in Oklahoma and grew up in Illinois.
And how did you end up in Colorado?
5 years ago, we came out to a homeschool conference because we work from home and we homeschool. Came out to a homeschool conference, landed in the Colorado Springs airport. The airplane doors opened up. I was standing on the steps to the airplane looking out. I saw the Rockies. I wasn't sweating from every orifice, and I wasn't getting attacked by C-130 mosquitoes drinking gallons of my blood. And I told my wife, I'm like, babe, what are we doing in North Carolina? We need to move to Colorado. So it took us a couple years to kind of get our house in order and get the house sold and stuff. And then 2.5 years ago, we moved out to Colorado Springs.
And you love it.
Absolutely love it.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, we're lucky to have you here.
Thank you, Jody.
If I asked your wife, Kathy, what does she love most about you? What might she say?
So her dad, she asked her dad 27 years ago, Dad, how do I know that this guy that I'm starting to communicate with is not going to be a bonehead or not turn into a chucklehead? And he said he's counseled thousands of couples. He's a missionary trainer and trained thousands of missionaries. And so he said, Hun, you just have to ask one question about him and you'll know. And she said, well, what's the one question? And he said, is he teachable?
Oh, wow. Say that again. What's the question, women, that you have to ask?
Yes.
And men.
Yes. Is he teachable? Because he said, if he's not teachable, you better love everything about this guy right now because he's not going to change. There's no, the whole missionary dating and, I'll get him to change or I'll get her to change. Not happening if they're not teachable. He said, but if he's teachable, then you can communicate and he will be open to change, your entire marriage. And so I think that's probably what she would say even today, is that regardless of all my emotional dysfunction and all the drama, is that I've been teachable throughout the whole journey.
So that would be great advice for anybody.
Absolutely.
Especially in relationships. What would your daughter say about you? What does she love most about Dad?
As a teenager, I think that I am fun and very, very relatable. And now I am safe with any emotions that she wants to express.
What do you say to your daughter, especially in adolescence, about emotion? What do you teach her, Noble?
So all the lessons that I've learned about emotional health and emotional intelligence, we're teaching her how to increase her self-awareness, some self-management tools.
Okay.
We're teaching her all that stuff.
Okay. Your biggest regret in life?
That I didn't learn emotional health and emotional intelligence 20, 30 years ago, sooner.
Okay. Your biggest challenge in life?
Overcoming my low EQ.
Okay. All related to what you do today.
Absolutely.
You're living it.
Yes.
Living it.
Absolutely.
Your greatest experience in the history of your life to date, Noble?
So my relationship with the Lord would be number one, and then my marriage, and then parenting, and then this new incredible breakthrough and transformation that I've been able to get through emotional healing.
Okay. If there was one message you would like to leave our audience, what would that be?
So a few points here. Unaddressed emotional issues don't get better with time. They
Okay.
actually compound. Number two, if you don't deal with your emotional issues, your friends, family, and colleagues will be forced to. Three, every day in every interaction with somebody else, you are on the receiving end, we are on the receiving end of each other's emotional intelligence or lack thereof. And
Okay.
lastly, emotionally healthy people help heal other people emotionally.
We're going to have you say that again because you froze up here. So
Okay.
we're going to have you say it again because we froze.
Emotionally healthy people help heal other people emotionally.
Okay. The world has gone through a lot, especially within the past 2 years, and things come and go as far as challenges, but it's been quite significant. But focusing in on America, what do you see is the biggest tragedy in the US today?
The the national emotional intelligence.
Okay.
There are some pockets of self-awareness, but very few people have self-management, self-regulation tools and abilities. And so
Okay.
that's why, in my opinion, that's why we see so much dysfunction in the world is there's very little self-awareness, very little self-management, very little social awareness, and
Okay.
very little social management. So I and there's a lot of factors and stuff, but I think we've because of that, we've lost our ability to, using the biblical principle of just loving your neighbor. We're,
Mhm.
we're, we're not doing a very good job at loving our neighbor
Mm.
for so many of us. There's so much division, right? We're so tribal that, and then of course we're fed by we talk about a powerful emotion. Fear is a powerful emotion,
Yes.
and media and the government, right? It's just
Mhm.
feeding the fear. The more I can get you afraid, the more I can control you. And when you're not emotionally healthy, you just get that fish hook in your lip, and you just go along with the fear and that kind of thing. And the healthier you become emotionally, you can recognize when somebody's trying to control you or manipulate you or put fear in you or whatever, and
Mm.
you can make more calm, rational, safe decisions that's best for you and your family.
The biggest asset being an American living in America today.
So in my opinion, it's freedom and liberty.
Mhm.
That's you start removing freedom, and you increase. I had many a number of years of experience with a narcissist, and when you get somebody that is intentionally trying to control and manipulate you, um, it's not a good feeling. It's not a good emotional experience when somebody, to include the media, to include the government,
Mhm.
or an organization. It happens in corporate America. It happens in churches, and anybody with power and rank and title and influence can use that properly or improperly. And when it's used improperly, you can really do damage to people. So for me, when you remove people's freedom, or you attempt to remove people's freedom, and you increase controls and regulations and that kind of thing, it can be very emotionally harmful for people, in my opinion.
How can people get in touch with you? Your website, your email, how can they get in touch? I'm sure you're going to get a lot of people interested in what you have to offer.
So EQGangster.com is our
Okay.
website. Podcast and YouTube channel are EQ Gangster. Social media, Instagram, Facebook, all EQ Gangster.
Wonderful. You know, thank you so much for this privilege, to be continued. And I'm so glad we were able to connect. I can't tell you that enough. And I wish you and your family good things, and Godspeed, Noble.
Thank you so much, Jody. I totally appreciate it. It's such a pleasure.
Thank you.